And whatever any of us may think about these topics, I hope we can keep the entire discussion respectful. As WDI USA says in its code of conduct, quote, "Disagree with ideas, not people. Disagreements should be handled civilly and respectfully. Assume good faith and understand that reasonable women can disagree. When expressing different views, focus on explaining your perspective without personal attacks or insults. Always maintain a civil and respectful demeanor toward others." And so with that said, I'm so happy to see all of you and to have this really important, frankly, discussion. I have asked each speaker to give a 5 to 7 minute presentation about the topic generally, and then I'll ask each of them a follow-up question based on their initial presentations, which should leave around 15 minutes of Q&A. Now, I will say we'll be starting with Senator Val Applewhite, and then we'll go to Maron of New York, and then we'll finish with Jenny Poyer Ackerman. I thought we were going to have Senator Regino Barrow from Louisiana, who is one of 4 Democrats who voted to protect women's sports in Louisiana a few years ago. And yep, give her a hand, but she was... However, she was not able to make it, so I'm disappointed that she can't be with us, but also that we only have about an hour for this, and Catherine has graciously said that we can cut into the next session. So I do want to take the whole hour, and so we've got plenty of time to dig into this topic. Okay, so with all that in mind, let's get started. The speakers' bios in full are in your materials, so I'm just going to introduce them very briefly. North Carolina State Senator Val Applewhite was elected in 2022 to represent District 19. She's the first African-American woman senator elected to represent Cumberland County. Her previous elected position, was as a member of the Fayetteville City Council, where she served 3 terms as the District 7 representative. Senator Applewhite was the sole Democrat in the state Senate to vote to protect female-only sports in 2023. So we'd like to hear 5 to 7 minutes, a little more if you need them.
Okay. Yeah. Good evening, ladies. It is so good to be here. I'm so thankful for the invitation to come here. I didn't know this amazing group existed, but I'm so glad that Kara reached out to me to invite me here. So I want to tell you a little bit more about myself, the political climate in North Carolina, how I took the vote, and an aftermath, and then we'll save some for the questions. I don't have slides. I'm more of a storyteller, so, you know. And I would have been more casual. I came all looking like a senator, and man, I could have came in my jeans and stuff, right? So one of the things I want to add to this background is that I'm an Air Force veteran. I served 20 years in the Air Force. That's important. Thank you. That's important to know because it helps. That's aim high. That's right. It's important to know because it kind of shapes my thinking and how I come to my conclusions as a legislator. Another thing that I want you to know is that I'm a boy mom. I have 2 sons who played every sport you can imagine. And I'm like that mom out on the field, like, go, go. You know, I'm just like, I'm giving it to them, right? That's important to know as well. And a little bit about my politics, and then we'll get into the vote. So as you heard, I served on the Fayetteville City Council. My election to Senate was very controversial. Governor Cooper stepped into a Democratic primary and endorsed me. That has never happened in electoral politics in North Carolina. Traditionally, you have governors that just let it happen in the primary and then endorse you when you go into the general election, but that was different. Governor Cooper stepped in, so that painted me as the Democratic candidate. I am a lifelong Democrat. I've always been one. I don't shy away from that. I don't always agree with my party on certain things, but for me, the Republican Party is just not some place where I can fit, particularly because of voting rights and a whole bunch of other things, but I'm a lifelong Democrat. So I get endorsed by the governor, I win my primary, and I win the general election against a Republican. No one thought I would do it. I get to the legislature. So when I walk in, everyone is like, that's the governor's girl. She's the Democrat. She's going to vote straight party. Like, don't mess with her. You can't even have a conversation with her. And that's just the way it was, right? So in our legislature, there is a supermajority, Republican supermajority, 30 Republicans and 20 Democrats. They don't need one of our votes to pass any legislation at all, right? And we knew that coming in the legislature were a host of anti-LGBTQ bills. We saw them coming, we were prepping for them. And I knew that there was one bill about sports that I was gonna have a problem with. Y'all, I was nervous. My heart was beating. I was like, God, please don't let this bill come up this session. What am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? I saw it advancing, and then it was going to be on the calendar. So I had to make my decision. So to make sure I wasn't just making a personal decision, my phone has like 100 coaches in my phone because I have I have sons that played sports. So I started calling all of the coaches and said, hey, coach, what do you think about this? What do you think? And overwhelmingly, they thought, it's a bad idea. It's a bad idea. My son, Damani, who plays basketball, he's 6'8", has a 7-foot wingspan, he came out of the bedroom one day, he went in, he was 6'2", and he came out, he was 6'8". I was like, what the hell is going on in that room, right? So that's important because I started having the conversation with him. He was that tall in high school. I said, Damani, what do you think about males playing with females? It's like, wow, that's like crazy. That's stupid. Like, who would really do that? And I started thinking about my son, who is 6'8". If he decided his name was Dana and not Damani, would it be fair for a biological male who is 6 feet 8 inches tall with a 7-foot wingspan to play against girls? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So now I am the Democratic candidate, and before we go out and vote, we have caucus, where the Dems go in and we sit down and we strategize our floor strategy. And I knew how I was going to vote, but I didn't tell anybody. My heart was beating so fast, and I was a freshman senator, so I'm sitting there very quietly, and everyone's talking. There was an assumption that everyone in the room was going to vote against that bill. So we didn't really drill on it because that's where Democrats are, right? So I was glad that we didn't have that discussion because sometimes the leader will say, okay, how are you going to vote on this? So we could know when we get out on the floor, but they didn't do that on this bill. I was glad. We go up to the floor and the bill comes up. I could hear my heart beating in my ears. And called for the vote. So because we are 30-20, any difference up there, somebody moved sides. So it was 19-31, and Applewhite had a red light by her name. Immediately, 2 seats down, one of my colleagues says, and she's in the LGBTQ community, she comes over to me and whispers, she says, did you make a mistake on your vote? She says, oh, it's okay, it's okay. I said, no, I didn't make a mistake. So across the dais, there's a senior Democrat, and she got up, and she walked all the way across the room. I'm like, oh, God. She's coming to my seat. So she leans over, and she says, you do know that our advocates are going to be very angry with you about this. I said, yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. because there is an opportunity to say, Mr. Speaker, can you please change my vote? I think that's what she came all the way across to have me do. So we were done. It got ice cold. No, no one would even look at me for my party. So anyway, I go home. No, immediately after the vote, it starts. They said Senator Applewhite is the lone Democrat to, so now all of the media picks up on this. It is burning up. Remember, I'm the governor's girl. I'm the Democratic governor's girl who was, air quote, handpicked by the Democratic. How dare she? Oh my gosh, she went against the governor. Okay, I'm gonna wrap up. How many minutes do I have?
I was so rapt listening to you,
Okay,
I don't even
right.
know.
So.
You've been talking 7 minutes, so yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna give me 2 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, and I'll fast forward. So now the media is like, I'm all over the place. I'm like, dear God, why couldn't I have just taken the vote and like nobody paid attention to it? I get in the office the next day and my assistant is there and she has access to my emails. She's deleting before I log on. She's like, Senator, don't log on yet. Don't do that. And I'm like, why? And the hate mail was just, ow. The quote that I remembered the most, someone called me a transphobic, cisgendered whore. Another one was, kill yourself, you bee. I mean, it just went on and on and on. I was frightened. I called my sons down in my town. I said, hey, pay attention to the house if they're strangers. Police came up, the whole thing. I went home. It was horrible. I lost friends. Big nonprofit organizations called me up and said, we're not going to fund you, and we're going to do that. I say, okay, well, do what you got to do. That's fine. Don't threaten me. Don't you threaten me, okay? Don't threaten me. But I will end the story with what was super amazing when I got home is the number of text messages from women that said, thank you for doing that. And that's kind of like my story. Thank you. I think she wanted more.
Thank you so much, Senator, for doing that. Thank you for standing your ground. We know how hard it can be. And thank you again for being here with us. Okay, so now we're going to hear from a woman with a somewhat different story. So Maud...
With some similarities.
Yeah, some similarities. Maud Maron is the founder and president of Third Rail, an organization dedicated to free speech and expanding cognitive and viewpoint diversity in the workplace. She began her career as a public defender in New York, ran for city council and Congress as a moderate Democrat in 2021 and 2022, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what her life has been like since then.
Yeah, it's hard to be a moderate Democrat in New York. There's not a lot of moderate Democrats left anymore. It's all, you guys know that there's like a comic strip of some person sort of in the middle, like a little stick figure, and the people on the left push the person towards the right and he falls, and the person on the right kind of helps them up, and then the people on the left go darting far, far off to the left, and turn around and sort of say to the person in the middle, like, what's wrong with you? You MAGA, you right wing, you bigot. And that's what's happening to a lot of Democrats in New York. I am no longer a Democrat. I'm an independent as of last year, but I was for over 3 decades before that, I was a registered Democrat. The last presidential candidate that I contributed to was Bernie Sanders. I loved Bernie, but not so much anymore. But I did. There was a moment where I did. And I know Kara gave the caveat, but I voted for Hillary and I voted for Biden, and I'm not voting for Kamala Harris. And a huge part of it, there's a lot of reasons why, but a huge part of it is gender ideology. It's been a disaster for women, for girls, for athletes, but also our sons. I'm also a boy mom, although I have a daughter. I have 3 sons and a daughter. And this ideology is pernicious for all our kids. It's really, really bad for all of them. I think what I want to talk about a little bit is my school board battle. I got a lot of battles, but I just want to talk about the school board battle. I have unsuccessfully run as a moderate Democrat in the races that Kara mentioned, but I have successfully run for school board and for lots of leadership positions in my kids' schools. And this is my third term on the school board. Last term, the chancellor I don't want to go into too much detail about New York City politics, but the person who it's the largest school district in the nation, so it's not nothing. And our chancellor, who himself is a product of the New York City public schools, as is our mayor. The chancellor, the last mayor, who's a Bostonian, not Bill de Blasio. He was not a product of our school system, but he, and all four of my kids go to public schools, but the last guy passed what they called a code of conduct. It wasn't a code of conduct. It was a speech code, and it was meant to silence parents like me and women like all of you in this room to not say the things you're not supposed to say, like, that's not a woman, that's a man. So, and we, I knew it was coming. I wrote about it at the time, that this code of conduct would be used to silence parent dissent. Fast forward a few years. The tail end of last year, the 74 Million, which is used to be kind of moderate, but is now a left-leaning education magazine, wrote an article, sort of like a got you article, about private WhatsApp messages that they had of myself, another board member, a candidate who was running for Congress, and they quoted what we said in that WhatsApp message as in like, oh, we got you now, you bigot. And in those private WhatsApp messages that they quoted, I said things like, there's no such thing as a trans child, and that no child can consent to having changes to their body that will leave them, sterile and infertile. So in other words, I said the things in those that I'd say to any passerby on the street any time of day. And they called me up before and, would you like to comment on this? And I was like, well, what? It's kind of self-explanatory. What do you want me to comment about? I say, I told you what I think. And they printed it. The chancellor of my 4 children are in public school at the time, gets up at one of the citywide meetings and starts lambasting me and the other parents, saying that he expects people to behave like adults and it's unacceptable and this. I mean, I'm also a criminal defense attorney like Kara, and the fact is, it's like, I can say whatever I want on my WhatsApp messages. I can also say whatever I want on the street because we have a First Amendment that protects you don't have to like what I have to say. But anyway, that background was going on. Then I'm not a big fan of anti-Semitism, and I spoke out about that. And the chancellor said that they said I was bullying someone. I was not bullying someone because I wasn't speaking about any particular person. And he removed me from the school board. Every single newspaper based on this code of conduct. I was elected by the parents of my district to this school board. And every single, newspaper that covered this removal, although they technically said it was about this quote about anti-Semitism that they described as bullying, every single paper, including the New York Times, said she'd run afoul of the gender politics in the district. So everyone really attributed it to the fact that of the gender stuff. Oops, I left out a part. Let me back up. After they published this article about me, some of the people who love gender ideology on my school board started writing resolutions saying we need to support our trans-identifying students or blah, blah, blah. So I've been trying to focus on improving the math curriculum in our district. That's my thing. But I was like, all right, you want to talk gender? I'll talk gender. And I wrote a resolution about how in 2019 we passed gender guidelines in New York City that allow children to change their pronouns and not have parents notified, about how males can participate in girls' sports, how males can go into female spaces. And I got that passed through our council on a vote 8-3. 8 people supported a resolution saying we should have a conversation. This is my radical thing here. We should have a conversation 5 years after passing the 2019 gender guidelines. And this time, we should include female athletes, coaches, parents. To your point, Senator Applewhite, talk to the coaches. These are the people who are working with these young people, right? And they got so mad at me. I mean, so mad that was passed in March. every time since then, we have had a slew of trans activists, including Chase Strangio from the ACLU. Yeah. Yeah. And we have had hundreds of activists come out to boo us, to demand, and again, Senator Applewhite, when I said that there are some similarities to our story, when the chancellor came to our, it's a school board in New York, we call it a community education council, but it's a school board. When the chancellor came to our school board in June, every time I spoke, the activists would start, making noises, making chants, and one of the things they would chant is, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, the hateful whore has got to go." This is a school board that previously my children have gone to when I have to bring my kids with me before my husband gets off work and comes pick one of them up, So that's sort of what we're dealing with in the viciousness of the people who don't even want to have a conversation. The resolution that I wrote and that we passed called for a conversation. I didn't even say it's wrong for boys to be in girls' sports. I say it online, I say it to anyone who will listen, but the resolution said, can we have a review with update? The CAS report in England hadn't come out yet. We have new data, we have new analysis, and saying we should talk about it seems like a pretty reasonable thing. At any rate, to fast forward really fast through a lot of steps, I had gone into federal court with 2 other plaintiffs to challenge a couple of local things that aren't super relevant to us, but to challenge this code of conduct that was really a speech code and that I thought was going to be used to silence people and was used. I was the first parent thrown off one of the school boards. And we went into federal court, and our case was pending, and there was all sorts of boring lawyering stuff going on. And 2 days before school started this year, a federal court in the Eastern District in Brooklyn ordered me reseated on my school board because it violated my First Amendment rights to kick me off for things that I said.
Thank you, Maude. Okay, so now we'll move on to Jenny Poyer Ackerman. Jenny, as you heard earlier, became what is known as a, quote, ROGD mom 2 years before ROGD was identified in clinical research, when the staff at her daughter's middle school was fully trained and eager to affirm and celebrate her 13-year-old daughter's transgender identity. She writes the Transmuted Substack and hosts the Unmuted podcast, and as Carrie shared, she wrote the chapter on ROGD for the book Women's Rights, Gender Wrongs, published by WDI International in 2023. She currently serves on the board of directors of an organization that I am very excited to hear more about, Democrats for an Informed Approach to Gender. Thanks, Jenny. Oh, here you go.
Okay, I've never run for anything. No one's ever voted for me. So I can't do what they can do, but I can prepare and I can read. So that's what I'm going to do. Good evening. I'm Jenny Poyer Ackerman. In the words of another writer, I was ADAB, assigned Democrat at birth. And it's an identity I wore proudly until recently for reasons I'll come back to. I'm also a proud board member and a spokeswoman for DIAG, Democrats for an Informed Approach to Gender. DIAG is a 501c3 grassroots organization of liberal voters who know that gender ideology and the so-called gender-affirming care model are in direct opposition to core liberal values. DIAG is building a movement to shift the prevailing narrative around sex trait modification and sex denialism. Opposing this regressive, dangerous ideology should be a no-brainer for Democrats, who claim to be the party of science, gay and lesbian equality, and women's rights, not to mention free speech. Instead, critical discourse on this topic is dismissed as right-wing bigotry or simply muzzled. DIAG is working to bring our party back to reality and to its own core values. Politicizing gender ideology into a left versus right issue pressures liberals to deprioritize the safety and rights of women and girls as a sex class. Championing trans rights means subordinating our opportunities and honors, our safety and privacy. It means falsifying crime statistics. It means falsifying medical records and the foundation of educational instruction. It expects us to deny reality itself and to sacrifice the health and sanity of our children to an idea that is incoherent on its face and harmful in all its prescriptions. DIAG was built to tell elected Democrats that it's a grave mistake for them to heed the political demands of men who impersonate women, doctors who chemically castrate vulnerable young people, and so-called civil libertarians who routinely undermine free speech. I was initiated into the unhappy sorority of ROGD mothers back in 2016 when my daughter was a 7th grader. At the time, there was none of the organized resistance we have now. No WDI, no Parents with Inconvenient Truths, no Gender A Wider Lens podcast. The only books on the subject were the grievance porn rantings of activists, grifters, and zealots. I spent the first few years struggling just to define the problem, to make sense of it so I could know how to help my daughter. Today, I fully understand the ideology, where it came from, and what it wants from me and my family. It feels now like a chronic disease that can flare up at any moment and cause debilitating pain. But I've learned how to manage the symptoms while advocating for the cure. The 2 women who founded DIAG are also mothers navigating this crisis. The reason I'm here in their place is that they both require anonymity to protect their livelihoods, and in one of their cases, to keep her family together. This is a reality that probably doesn't even shock anyone here, but that's a sign of how much damage has been done to our bedrock societal norms in just a few years. The chilling of speech, the perversion of language, and the attacks on family bonds are merely the activists' opening salvo. Their achievements thus far have been astonishing and terrifying, but their continued success relies on our passivity, and we are no longer passive. As angry and frustrated as we may be and are with the Democratic Party over its catastrophic missteps, the remedy cannot be to abandon the party that was until recently the only political ally American women and girls ever knew, not without first ensuring it hears from each of us loud and clear. Democratic lawmakers are blithely sailing towards the rocks on this issue. DIAG intends to jolt them back to their senses. A return to open debate and civil discourse, untethered to divisive tribal politics, is the way forward. The more hands on deck, the sooner we get there. Thank you.
That's good.
Thanks so much, Jenny. All right, so I'm thinking of a question to ask each panelist, and then we'll go to the audience for questions. We thought that we were going to have 2 audience mics on stands, and it looks like we don't have those. So I will do my best to make sure we get them. Okay, we do have audience mics. They're just not on stands. So we'll figure out how to circulate the mics. In terms of, and there are the stands. All right, I'll get to that in a second. All right, so Senator, what I would like to ask you, in your story, you described the experience of casting your vote, and you described the reactions of 2 of your Democratic colleagues. Those 2 of your Democratic colleagues were both women. Now, those of us who have been in this fight for many years know that as devastating as it is, there are women who are totally complicit in throwing women and girls under the bus. It is awful, but it's true. So I guess what I would like to hear from you is, I understand that your general reaction to your colleagues' disappointment, shall we say, in your vote. Mm-hmm. Did you experience any particular thoughts or opinions or emotions around getting that feedback from women?
When I got home, are you saying?
Or in the immediate moment,
right.
Either.
Well, particularly the one that came across the room. She's one of the leaders in the caucus, and it is always about fundraising in North Carolina. You have to get money we want to break the supermajority. And when she said our, allies are going to be upset, I don't know how she felt personally really about the issue as much as she does in her leadership role, because we literally have to raise millions and millions and millions of dollars. And they felt I will say she felt as though that was going to damage our ability to fundraise. But other than in the caucus, in the political realm, when I got outside of that, people were like, thank God, that's why we vote for you, Val, because you just do what you're going to do, right? And so I got there, I didn't agree with them because politics can't be the end all for you. You have to be able to stand in the mirror and say, I felt okay about that vote, right? That's what's most important. That's what's most important. And I knew, we were just saying at the table, I knew when I got home, my sons are adults, but we always have these conversations. They know my opinion inside the house. We have inside the house conversations because your mom was a senator, and outside. So for me to go and vote anything other, to come back home and have those two boys look me in the face, it's like I say, Mom, you kind of didn't tell the truth there, right? So I don't know if I answered your question, but I would have hoped that other women, because we have more women in the Democratic caucus than the Republicans do with their 30, that other women would have said, this is insane. What are we doing? Let's draw the line on this. We're all together with reproductive rights. I'm okay. I think a woman should have an opportunity to choose what she wants to do with her body. We were all lockstep, but that is a Democratic platform. So, if you're in lockstep with that, you're okay. This right here was a platform, and you had to be in opposition to that. And I'll tell you a little bit what happened. The media doesn't know this. Is 2 days later, as I told you, I was endorsed by the governor, and a person came to visit my office. So I am in my office, and I hear my secretary, my assistant say, oh, Mr. Such and Such. And I was like, it's like going to the principal's office. When that person comes to see you, it's never good news, right? And he walked into my office, and we had chit chat. And I said, so are you here about the vote? Let's just go ahead and get it over with. He said, yeah, I am. He stepped right to me. I said, well, let's talk about it. And it got that much visibility, you guys. The only thing that, I'm not going to say saved me, because there were some groups that wanted to try to primary me, but because I had been a city councilwoman and my base follows me, no one can beat me in a primary, right? They just can't beat me. So, I don't want to belabor it. So I did what I did, and I stand by it, and I tell people, if you don't like it, respectfully, see me in November.
It's really amazing because we've seen so many people take a stand and then back down, and you're not doing that. So, okay, so Maude, when you said you are no longer a Democrat, you are an independent, and that you will not vote for Kamala Harris, you got a lot of claps in the room. If you don't mind, having been a lifelong Democrat, so let me just say this. I'm a lifelong Democrat. In the last few years, I cannot tell you the number of times I have pulled up the DC voting registration page, clicked the independent box, stared at the screen for hours, and then shut it down and remained a Democrat. What made you pull the plug?
It's so funny. I wrote about it. If you want to know what I think, you can look up my name in the New York Post, because I write in the New York Post all the time, because the New York Times does not want to hear from ex-Democrats like me, even when I was a Democrat. And for me, it was around free speech, actually. There was the House Committee on, it's a long name, the House Committee on War Weaponization of Government, something, and they had a bunch of journalists testifying, and Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger went and testified. They talked about the Twitter files, the things you were not allowed to say. And some of the stuff that's deeply important to all of us in this room is the stuff that under the pre-Elon Musk Twitter, like you could get, throttled or kicked off completely, or, there were all sorts of things you couldn't say. You couldn't say stuff about COVID. You couldn't say stuff, but, misgendering things could be an offense. And so I watched them testify. And I had run for Congress, and it's New York 10 is a district I ran in. Dan Goldman won that race. It helps to be a self-funded millionaire and have the New York Times endorsement when you run in New York, but he won fair and square, and he was up there questioning the journalists. And the derision from all of the Democrats about, speaking to these journalists as if they were just beyond the pale, like they just could. And it was like, every single thing they're saying is backed up by fact. They had access to all these files. They printed it. It's credible journalism by journalists who have been around forever. At least engage in the debate around a whole bunch of subjects, gender being one of them. But for me, free speech is such an incredibly important thing, and we're not a free people without it. So that was a straw that broke the camel's back for me.
Got it. Thank you. And then for Jenny, okay, great, thank you. So DIAG is a new organization.
Yes.
Can you speak to the timing of the launch? Do you feel a particular urgency around it? And if so, talk a little bit about that.
Well, DIAG was launched a little over 7 months ago. So it's not a just-in-time, delivery system for the election. But I think it's good that, we kind of got those 7 months under our belt, because now, it's sort of game time. The urgency is, this is a party that was created by the left. Did I say it's a party? It's a problem. This issue, this controversy is a problem for us that was created by us, on the left. And, and in the process, it became cast, by it I mean gender ideology, trans rights, trans kids, protecting trans kids, all became cast as the politics of the left, and so thus the Democratic Party. And so we've backed ourselves into this appalling corner that we're going to have to get out of. No one's going to do it for us. And so DIAG's, burning goal for the next, however, it's 5 weeks now, is to just get as many people signed up. And to sign up, what you do is you go to diag.org, and you don't have to give your real name or your address. You just have to give your zip code, because it's important that your legislators know if there's a critical mass of Democrats or just liberal voters who care about this issue. They need to hear it, because especially in the blue states like mine, California, we don't have anyone like Val. We have no one like Val. And it's just because the voices of the extreme left are so strong and powerful and so moneyed and so generous, that they're just kind of like, what did you say? Who are you? I can't hear you. So it's just going to take numbers for them to hear us, and so that's what needs to happen. So you sign up with your zip code and your email address, and that way there's a little point on the map that represents you, and that that your elected officials can know that you are represented, you are spoken for under DIAG. And it just, if we can get the numbers, then we can start to make a difference.
And it's an outstanding organizing effort, because we know we have the numbers, right? Mm-hmm. There are so many of us out here who are so angry, and I hear from people every day like, oh, I'm a Democrat, what's going on? And an equal number of people who are like, I've had it with the Democrats, I'm out, Okay, so we want to have a discussion. Please, if you'd like to ask a question, come stand at one of the mics. Please be aware, though, that the panel is being recorded. So if you do not want to be recorded, we can just make sure that we don't capture your face on camera. But come up to either mic. Let me do a quick time check. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes to go. Go ahead.
Hi. So this is a question to the two politicians on the panel. The way you described, especially you, Ms. Applewhite, the reaction you got from your fellow senators, it seemed incredibly patronizing. And you as well, you know, having the people at the New York Times and journalists talking down to you, how do you think that that's something that we can work with moving forward? Because the patronizing attitudes, I feel like that's what a lot of us deal with when we're trying to explain to other people. And so how do you go about dealing with that professionally?
Just a real quick response is, I hoped that all of the responses that I got, like when I got home, people were like, yay, you did it. Like, say that publicly, right? Just like say it publicly, not a secret text to me or secret phone call, but just like, damn it. Like, call a General Assembly and say, she's not alone. Like, there's a whole lot of us like that. So as, you know, en masse, if you say something and join this organization, because as a Democrat, they think I am not that extreme liberal person. I'm just not. Most African Americans tend not to be extreme liberal. I'm somewhere in the middle here, right? But if you have your voices, and I know it's hard because I was frightened. Like, I had to have the local police department put cars outside of my house. I was afraid to go. I'm very public in large spaces, and I'm always like, hey, I'm all over the place. I didn't even go out to events anymore. I know it's scary to do, but like, it can't just be me. If other elected officials see that there is support, I'm so glad to be here. I didn't like know other women felt like this, right?
I'll give it a real quick answer, which is you also have to be comfortable realizing I'm no longer welcome in that space, but I am welcome in other spaces, and the New York Times, New York Post distinction in New York is a good one. Kara and I, this is no secret, but I'll say we both have we're on the Tucker Carlson show when he was on Fox, and that's because that was the biggest TV audience either of us could get on, because as someone who used to watch Rachel Maddow on MSNBC every night, she wouldn't touch me with a 10-foot pole, right? Like the she also has a smaller audience. Well, yes, that was true too. But you know, so I started writing for the New York Post because they're very happy to hear what I have to say. And in New York, you know, the New York Times was sort of the end all and be all fancy elite magazine, and the New York Post was like the tabloid and the dip. But the truth is, you know which paper prints parents' perspectives and listens to parents on all sorts of education issues, not just gender stuff that's been important to me, is the New York Post. So you say, well, you know what? You gotta like change your perspective about where it's acceptable to who you're rubbing shoulders with and who you're talking to, and if people who are willing to listen are the people you gotta talk to.
So, and I don't know if Maude wants to elaborate on this, but on the particular question of the patronizing tone, some of the top Democrats in New York treated her horrifically, right? Jerry Nadler.
Oh yeah, that one. Let me just tell you, when we passed this resolution saying that we should, not even against males in female sports, but just saying, can we have a conversation about it? Jerry Nadler, who's one of the longest-standing U.S. senator, Congress people, and 17 other elected officials in New York wrote and signed a letter calling our parent volunteer resolution, it's an advisory resolution, and we're all unpaid volunteers, calling our resolution hateful, bigoted, and likely to cause harm. Right, you're talking, he's in the US Congress, I'm on an all-volunteer school board, and they thought he needed to comment on my non-binding resolution saying, can you all listen to some female athletes on this issue, right? So yeah, the patronizing is the nicest way to say it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Joanne.
Yeah, hi. I just first really want to thank all of you. It's just been a terrific panel. And I guess one of the things that I think it was Val you brought up about is that they're afraid about money. And I think, this is something I want to touch on tomorrow in my talk as well, is that I think all the big advocacy groups, that really are the backbone of the Democrats' money raising, it's a problem. Do you have any thoughts about how to break that money cycle, or no? Okay.
I can speak about North Carolina. We passed legislation that allows money to get into politics. I mean, Republicans have the big donors. They just have the money.
Yeah.
So we rely on these C4s, and we have this big tent. We get a lot of money from California, so we have to fundraise in California and New York because the money in North Carolina is just not there. And what is important for us now in the Senate, we have to break the supermajority. So right now we think we can pick up 2 seats. With Kamala Harris, there's energy in North Carolina that we think is going to be blue. We will at least pick up two seats and maintain the governor's seat, which will allow the governor to veto, and we will be able to sustain his veto against bad legislation. But that takes money. They out-fundraise us like crazy. So they want to stay in good graces with these organizations. And I had one of the larger, LGBTQ organizations that sit on the donor table in North Carolina. She threatened me. She says, well, I sit at the donor table. And I said, what does that mean? What are you saying to me? So let's just be really clear. She said, well, it means what it means. I said, okay, I got you. Right? And so I don't know how that changes.
Anybody else? No.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
Okay.
the money behind this,
It's just amazing.
it's just, I mean, and I'm sure there's a finite number, but I have no idea what
I
it
don't think
is.
it's finite.
It's way out there.
I'll say for New York politics, and that's super interesting about North Carolina politics being so influenced by donors in California and New York, because it spreads our super liberal, I used to call myself a liberal, so calling super liberal as a bad thing feels weird, but like that super lefty on the gender stuff, that it spreads it to other places. So I'm gonna have to think on that a little bit. But in New York, it's not so much money. There's tons of money on both sides. In New York, it's votes. Like, they are not gonna stop this stuff until they start losing some elections. Like, it has to cost them, and in order for it to cost them, people need to speak up. And exactly what the senator said about, I get all sorts of emails and texts, and didn't have for a long time, about like, oh, I agree with you, Maude. And it's like, well, stop whispering.
Totally. Bev, go ahead.
Well, kind of on that note, first, thank you so much for a great panel. I have just so much respect for all 4 of you. I was wondering, at least one of you said something like you can no longer vote Democrat, or you're not going to vote Democrat. I'm wondering if anybody would be willing to share who she's going to vote for. And I would really love to hear it. And I also want to hear if Trump wins, what kind of changes do you think, as far as our issue, we all know what our issue is, will things really change? And I'm asking this sincerely because I'm really curious about who I myself am going to vote for. I've told everyone my plan is to write in Karen Dansky. I need to write in a vice president, though, I think. So maybe somebody here. But in all seriousness, in all seriousness, I would really love some guidance. And anyone who wants to tell me who she's thinking of voting for, I would love to hear it. No judgments.
Jenny jumped at the chance.
Well, Bev, but you stole my answer, because I'm on record as being a Kara Dansky write-in voter. I put a photograph of my ballot, my primary ballot, with Kara Dansky written in. I put it in a Substack post. Maybe you didn't see that one. But yeah, so it worked. It felt great that, for the primary, so I don't plan to make any changes in the general.
If you do that, you can genuinely say you voted for a Democrat without worrying about throwing women and girls under the bus.
That's right. Also, I live in California, so it just doesn't matter at all. Like I can do a symbolic vote.
Well,
and
that's
it's kind of-
another thing, so that makes it difficult. So I want to hear what the rest of y'all
Well,
think too.
Well, I'm voting for Kamala Harris. I'm a surrogate for her. It's even tough being here right now because I'm on the campaign trail with her. So what issues are important to me? The Republicans, their positioning on voting rights is unacceptable to me. North Carolina is the ground zero for voter suppression from voter ID. They've gone from voter ID now to signature verification scanning. Like, they just don't want black and brown people to vote. So I can't go there. Yes, women's reproductive rights, they've reduced 20-week abortions down to 12. For those of us who have children, heck, you don't know you're pregnant until 6 or 8 weeks anyway, right? Reproductive rights are important to me, and also in North Carolina and across red states, they are defunding public education. Public education, in my opinion, is the foundation, is the great equalizer for all of us, regardless of race, gender, anything. And in red states, my district alone is a tier 1, high poverty, high distressed county, and they're giving public tax dollars to private schools. We're losing $25 million. And we have 100-year-old schools whose boilers don't work and kids sit in gloves. So for me, the Trump ticket down to the Mark Robinson, if you're watching CNN, you know who Mark Robinson is. Okay, I'm being recorded. And all the way down the ballot. So for me, from a North Carolina perspective, it's important. So this is what you should know. And CNN even covered it. We knew it already. If North Carolina turns blue, Trump cannot win. He cannot win. It's North Carolina for the bloc. He has no other path. And that is why Kamala Harris has been there 18 times. That's why he's in Asheville or Wilmington tomorrow night. So if North Carolina turns blue, and I'm spending every single waking moment to make sure that North Carolina is blue.
So I just want to jump in and say I want to give Maude an opportunity to answer the question. I want to take Liz's question and Aj's question, and then I think we're going to have to be done with the panel for the night. So Maude, go ahead.
yeah, so I'll say that, I hear on the write-ins, I totally get it and I understand it. But just like I think there's no such thing as non-binary, there's no such thing as, not voting for somebody. If you don't vote one way, you're supporting the other candidate, right? So at least that's the way my voting philosophy is. So I'm going to vote for Donald Trump, even though I haven't ever voted for him before. And I think little support in here for that. And it's really because, and look, I woke up in 2016 and thought, like, what the hell just happened to our country? Like, I was devastated. I brought my daughter in to vote with me for Hillary. I took pictures of it, posted it on Facebook. I was like weepy about it. I was like, we're our first woman president. I don't even like Hillary Clinton, but I was like, it's so exciting to have our first woman president. And 8 years later, yeah, I'm going to vote for the Trump Vance ticket for lots of reasons, but gender ideology is a huge one. Free speech is another one. I had to go to federal court to get myself back on my school board because the entire Democratic establishment of my city wanted me gone because they don't like the things I say. But I also think the economic policy, neither one of them are that great, honestly, but like the economic policy of Kamala Harris saying like, you get $25,000 and you get $25,000 and it's bonkers, like it's insane. And that's not our subject here, so I won't go into it, but it's like, it's not just gender, it's like a whole long list of things where I think that the party that had my loyalty, my votes, and my money for so many years is unrecognizable to me.
Thank you.
Okay, let's hear from Liz and then Aja.
Yeah. So I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. But this question's for Ma. Go peg legs. So to put in context how important it is that she's holding the line on Resolution 248. New York has a proposition on the ballot this November that would put gender identity in the state constitution. So what I want Maud to talk about is what it's like holding the line against a potential constitutional amendment, and also what that would mean for Resolution 248 if that passes.
Yeah, because this is real New York specific, thank you. It's a great question because it's so New York specific. I'll keep it super brief, but like, it's so radical in New York, and I know California, you know, is probably worse. It's always a little bit worse in California. They want to put gender identity, gender expression, sexual, all this stuff in the state constitution, and that will just make it incredibly hard. I don't even think people really understand what it means, and I've talked to a few different people. We're sort of speculating. What does it mean if the school wants to socially transition your kid and you say, my parental rights are such that, like I don't give you permission to do that to my child, and they say your child has a constitutional right to their gender expression. First of all, what does gender expression even mean, right? It's not just gender identity, it's gender expression. It's like, you know, people say, I've heard a lot of folks, sensible folks say, there's two sexes and endless personalities, and it's true, right? Like, what gender expression? Do I have a different gender expression if I'm wearing a dress or pants? Like, what is gender expression? And I literally don't know what the definition is. How do you make something a constitutionally protected right that you can't define? So it's really, really important to oppose it in New York.
So, and Maud or Liz can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think it's as bad as Maud said, but I think it's even worse because it's being touted by its proponents as an abortion rights measure. So countless New York women are going to vote for this, thinking it's an abortion, and it does say some things about abortion. I mean, it's not an outright lie, but it's really being touted as a pro-abortion rights, and countless New York women are going to vote for it, having no idea what it's going to mean for their children.
And unnecessarily, because in New York State, our legislature, we have a supermajority of Democrats in New York and Albany, and abortion rights they only got stronger. The legislation strengthened your right to reproductive health care in New York. I'm a pro-choice, you know, my whole life been a pro-choice person, but pro-choice woman. I never call myself a person, and now calling yourself a person is like a weird thing, but like, we don't need it. Like, they're passing something wholly and completely, and a supermajority, fully protected access in the law, and so it's a complete canard to say that it's to strengthen abortion access.
Thank you. Okay, Aja.
Yes. Hello, ladies. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm so happy to be here. My question is primarily about, I know, Senator, you mentioned that you received some text messages of support. I think many of us have, experienced those little quiet messages of support. But I would think, with your extent and your platform and your visibility, you might get a bit more of those. And I'm curious, as particularly as Democrats, as now independent, what the volume of that has been, primarily from others on the left and other progressives and other Democrats, and if any of that shapes your work and your actions.
Quiet support. Yeah, the quiet support. Just not really. I just stand on what I believe. Being an elected official doesn't define who I am, right? So I just stand on what I believe. It's just really that simple. And if people don't like it, see me in November. I hate to keep saying that, but I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. But when it comes to policy, I try to make sure it's just not Val's opinion, right? So I go out and I'm very active in the community. I go to churches, I go to different groups. Hey, what do you guys think about this? They engage me on social media a lot. So I try to get the feel of the community and constituents, what they feel. But then there are some votes that my little finger, regardless of what everybody says, I can't push a certain button, but I try to make sure it's not just Val Applewhite, and I'm representing the 200,000, or I don't know how many people I have. It's a lot. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I try to consider all aspects, and then I go in my little quiet space, and I have to make the call.
So Aja's question actually reminded me of something that I'd like to ask a closing question for all three panelists. And with the senator, I'm framing it in terms of sort of, has this affected in any way, positively or negatively, relationships with Republican colleagues? So she laughed. And so part of the reason I'm asking is, as a lot of the women in this room know, I have had reason to make common cause with some conservative-leaning women's organizations, and WDI USA happily supports many Republican-sponsored bills because they do the right thing, and we get a lot of flack for it from a lot of feminists who don't like that we do it. But it has been a really interesting couple of years in terms of thinking about cross-partisan women's organizing. And so for Senator, has this affected your relationships, if at all, with your Republican colleagues? And for Maud and Jenny, do you just want to riff off of what I said about cross-partisan women's organizing?
It's very partisan in North Carolina, and no, it did not improve my relationships. it didn't, right? But for the moment, it was like, oh, we got one, yeah, So I was able to. They were able to say it was it was a bipartisan effort, and so for a couple times, some of my Republican colleagues were like, yeah, and Senator Applewhite, we know how you feel. I'm like, well, what about that defunding of schools? Feel that, right? But it did not change my relationship. It's kind of like they used me, but they used me for that moment, but my vote wasn't for them, but they captured that and said, see, Democrats believe in us too. So, yeah, they used me, but I was okay with that because I stood on what I believed.
Maud or Jenny, do you want to?
Yeah, I think I've had a more similar experience to you, Kara, because in New York, it's all of a sudden like, well, I kind of tend to agree with the Republican on free speech, on gender ideology, on like a laundry list of issues, and it makes you have to look twice and think twice about who you're supporting. Choice is probably the biggest difference, for me, the biggest issue with some of the Republicans in the state, but it's like a non-issue in New York because it's so far away, and I just think that like, as I if I ever run again, I would probably run as a Republican and not a Democrat in New York because I know, but you'll like the next thing I'm gonna say, which is this. If all the Democrats woke up tomorrow and were like, oh my God, we lost our mind for a moment about free speech and gender and they go back to being classic liberals and really protecting the values I care about, I'll come right back to you, but not until then, You wanna?
Yeah. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like Planned Parenthood version 1.0, which most of us probably supported vehemently, was supported by the wife of President Bush 41, Barbara Bush, right? And so.
And Laura.
Okay, yeah, wow. I think. So I feel like, cross-party feminism or cross-party advocacy for women is probably the best thing we can do for this country, because the way it is now, our arguments can be dismissed by somebody just saying, oh, well, that's what Moms for Liberty believes, and therefore, you're done talking. Because, there's just these, these hard-drawn characteristics of these groups that are presumed just to be, the devil incarnate. And we just won't get anywhere, doing that. Because then every American would have to sign up for 100% of whatever the party we say we belong to is feeding us, and then they can just get away with murder, which is what's happening now. So I feel like, hands across the aisle, let's do it, let's lead the way.
All right, thanks to the panelists, thanks to everyone for bearing with us. We went a little bit over time.